Hello, and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of Hollywood and foreign cinema from the then and now. We are your hosts, me, Leonardo Miranda, Tomás Ferreira,
Hello.
and Miguel Aido.
Buenos dias.
Hey, we are three filmmakers in an informal dialogue with a film review each episode. As part of our detective adventure, reviews in both English and Portuguese will be available for different listeners. Today's episode will be in English and we'll be having a go at Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr. Portuguese speakers can head to the Portuguese labeled content section. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. Now sit back and enjoy the show.
Enjoy the show, little kids. Here comes a silent sweetie. Sherlock Jr. is a 1924 American silent comedy film directed by and starring Buster Keaton and written by Clyde Bruckman, Gene Havis, and Joseph A. Mitchell. It features Catherine Maguire, Joe Keaton, and Ward Crane. In 1991, Sherlock Jr. was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. In 2000, the American Film Institute ranked the film in its list of the funniest films of all time. However, did the RWC podcast find the tricks of old Buster as intriguing and humorous as they were back then? Well, fellows, do we have anything to say for old Buster? I'm putting on my transatlantic accent, this is more 40s than anything, but what are the thoughts?
It's got nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do at all. This is a silent film. Anyway.
Well, I liked it.
I liked it.
I've watched this film a billion times.
I imagine so. This is perhaps my third time, but yeah.
I mean, first time I watched it was in the Cinematheque Portuguese.
Oh yeah? Awesome.
It was great experience. Alongside the Purple Rose of Cairo of Woody Allen, also pretty good.
Okay, yes.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was the first time of many. Wonderful. Sherlock Jr. I think it's probably one of his most perfect films. He has a few that I consider perfect. 1 Week, The Short, I also love that one. Yeah, this one I think is the most impressive as well because of the creativity of the gags and the two worlds, the real world and the dream world, and the way they communicate with each other. I think it's very, for its time especially, it wasn't really something that was done or had been done before. And to see him do it in such a creative way, the way when his soul leaves his body almost and goes into the projection and jumps onto the screen, and there's the match frames between the different scenes inside the film, and them flying among those different worlds. Yeah, I just think it's super impressive and beautiful.
How do you think he differs from his contenders of the same era, like Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd?
I'm not as familiar with Harold Lloyd, although I've seen a couple. But with Charlie Chaplin, I think Chaplin is a bit more contained and more emotional, his narratives. Whereas Keaton, it's much more about, it's a lot lighter in emotional terms, and less about the stunts, but more about the tramp character itself. Whereas Keaton, he's a sort of a...
He's a stone face.
A stone face.
Exactly, yeah.
So you project the emotion onto him. He's more of a... he has less character. I don't want to say that, but compared to Chaplin, he has less character because, Chaplin, he's the poor guy, he's the tramp, always down on his luck. Keaton is a lot more malleable from film to film. It differs a little bit.
He doesn't have this stereotypical or archetypal, character, let's say, that carries over from film to film, almost like if it was a franchise, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not his trademark. His trademark is much more his stone face as an expression, something that he would say, that I use this expression because if I would laugh, then the audience, or smile, the audience wouldn't smile with me. So to really gain from the misery that attacks me from all these kind of circumstances, because his comedy is a comedy, I think, a comedy of circumstances, uh, that the silent era could take fruits from, which is not the comedy of circumstances that today in the contemporary times we know. Like the comedy of circumstances of today is the comedy of Larry David, of Seinfeld, which takes a lot of advantage from the sound era. It's about the words and the use of the colloquialism and the adjectives and the humorous dry humor of the situations. So a lot of dialogue heavy. Then the circumstances were from the weird situations that will come from physical perils, I think. So, which, really takes advantage from the fact that it's purely a physical medium back then, not really sound. So, not laughing, not smiling, he knew that the audience will read my surprise if I don't say anything, if I don't smile. And that is an intriguing kind of approach that he has. It is an intriguing film in the sense that for most of the beginning, you kind of follow the story as he is this kind of film projectionist working at a small movie house, and at the same time, this aspiring, detective student who is really clumsy, and he has that in similarity with Chaplin. But right down the middle, perhaps, is when the slapstick starts happening. And I think, for example, I've seen also The General, his kind of the other great famous film of his, and I find intriguing how, let's say, the action film was really born in the silent film era already, but it was in comedy that he really felt that the action film genre had its true beginnings. And the action hero started here with Buster Keaton. Even the director of the current films of John Wick, Keanu Reeves, says that he takes inspiration from Buster Keaton films, because he is, in essence, a kind of action hero, perhaps even more in The General, where I think he has much more of the courageous type character in The General, and which I think is much more of an epic film, and where he has much more greater stunts. And actually, by difference with Sherlock Jr., the stunts and the performative acts that he does in The General are much more consistent with the action and within the action. And that thing I appreciate more just from a storytelling perspective. In Sherlock Jr., though I appreciate the endearingness of how he accomplished these great things, I think they are more kind of gags dissociated from sometimes more or less in the story, sometimes just things to really kind of entertain the audience. They don't happen within the story. Sometimes you feel like they kind of happen in the film too.
Like which ones?
For example, when he's projecting the film and he's dreaming about coming onto the screen, the very act of him being clumsy and stumbling through the cuts into these different landscapes, almost falling. Of course, it is funny. Of course, it is wondrous, because there's this kind of communication with. There's this idea that even though you're watching a film, a piece of cinema that is very early in the history of cinema, you already see kind of the awe of the public back then, that he's commenting on that the public, of that the movie-going public had this awe of going to the films and stepping inside the film itself, the film landscape. And he's really entering in communication with that aspect of movie-going when he does this moment that is a meta moment in cinema, when he goes inside it and he kind of plays with cinema, with film. He's kind of inside the whole landscape, and he stumbles upon these different cuts as they go along. But it feels a little bit let's do this because it will be funny. It feels a little bit like that.
I mean,
I don't know.
It's a bit of both, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of both, I guess.
The way you explained it almost immediately invalidates you saying that it's like, it's just for it's not just for.
No, it isn't, because, then the narrative picks up within the dream, let's say, and here we get back to the girl and the dilemma with the missing pearls or the missing clock situation that the villain stole and framed him for. But even then, for example, within the dream, he's inside this rich mansion. He pictures the girl being a rich girl from this rich father. It's kind of a whole different scenario. And the villains, comically enough, it's like the villains have these laid down traps inside the house of this girl. Like they didn't say anything to her, and they make these traps happening, like the explosive ball from the snooker game, or the axe that falls from the wall, this decorative piece um, of a house, right, that falls and hits the chair. It feels like it doesn't make much sense. It's funny, all right, but it's kind of like it's there to really please me, I think, and to entertain me. I feel it has disjointed.
How is that's great? That's the
I mean,
purpose.
I'm just, I'm just pinpointing something. I'm not like
I know,
saying that,
I
oh, this
understand.
spoils everything for me.
Controversy.
This film is horrible. I don't care about this film.
Headlines.
Yeah,
I see, but I think it's very understandable.
I mean, I don't say it to say that the film is horrible because of these things at all. It's all endearing and funny, but I am aware of this aspect of the film by dissonance with the general, where I feel that the gags, the physical gags, are much more consistent with how the story develops.
I think they're very different films.
But they are very different films, of course.
I mean, this film is playful. It's like the whole purpose is to be playful and to play with form and to play with cinema. So I think it makes perfect sense to have these over-the-top narratives inside the film itself, the film within the film, and to be very almost meta. Like it doesn't make much sense, but it's a film people are watching, and they're seeing it develop. And is it being developed this way because the film was written this way and the people inside and the people watching the film are watching this develop exactly like this, or is it the dream of the character, or is it him changing the world of the film? Like there's many possibilities that I think is very ambitious for a film like this, that is above all a comedy, and it's
Yeah.
making the purpose is to make you laugh and to make you charmed and feel good, have a good time. 45 minutes,
Yeah.
The general is is also very ambitious. It's not a film that I'm as crazy about, but it's super impressive. It's an action film above all, and crazy stunts. I mean, the whole thing with the train, once it picks up, it's like insane. The things he does in that train, and
Yeah, it's one of his most acclaimed films. Orson Welles called it the best film of all time at some point, and he has that amazing, for the time. I mean, so much things happen in that film in terms of stunts that are just amazing for the time. I wonder how he accomplished it, and I think it's more amazing because I watch Keaton do these stunts, these performative, physical, dangerous things, and I'm impressed because I know that all of it, if not most of it, is practical, and it's the man himself doing it. I mean, he comes from a background where he worked at the circus with his father. He was part of an act called the Three Keatons, then Five Keatons, where he was thrown around by his father in this act where he has a kid, this makeup that made him, feel like a little small man. He used to tease his father in this act, and his father would, annoyed by it, throw him around, let's say, the spectacle and the stage, and he would endure everything. So he kind of grew understanding how to use his body to resist the falls and stumbles and all of that. So you really feel that in his films. I mean, the stunts that he does are impressive. And when you watch The General and you see him in front of the train, knocking about these big logs of wood, you can't help but feeling in awe of it. Even if the train is going at a very slow speed, and even a very slow speed for a train is dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's sometimes you look at these things and it's easy to look at them, but if you were to do them even today, and someone told me, "Do you want to try?" I'm like, fuck off, I'm not gonna try this. I mean, call Buster Keaton over here, but I'm not gonna put myself in front of a train and try and kick around logs. It's fuck you. No,
Even for
no
stunt
way.
people.
Yeah.
Even for stunt people. And back then, the stunt people profession didn't exist really. There were willingful extras that would come in and say, "Oh yeah, I can do that," and then they would do it for a couple of years, and they would find because it pays well, but then they would find another job that was less dangerous. So it was something that really built over time, and it's very interesting. I mean, I think that there should be an Oscar for best stuntman or stuntwoman. I think that would be very valid. I mean, those guys are artists in their own right.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure how. I mean, unless they award a team of people, it's kind of
or
strange
Yeah,
that,
to
yeah,
give
yeah.
or
No,
to one
that.
I
person.
would say that.
Sure. Of course, that's what I mean at large. Oh, I thought a lot about Tom Cruise while watching this film and the general. They talk about Tom Cruise a lot, but Buster Keaton, I think he was something because he did these big things and he had no safety net.
Hmm.
He had no. I mean, I don't think there was the level of rehearsal and a team behind him as much as we have today. So it is very impressive what the man does in his films.
Yeah, yeah. He was
Yeah.
crazy, just like Tom.
Uh,
Both fucking
mhm.
insane.
Yeah. They risk their lives for our entertainment.
Yeah.
It is also interesting to see the kind of little narrative devices that he uses throughout the film.
Sherlock or
That
general?
this, I mean, it's interesting to see the narrative device that he used throughout the film. I mean, Buster Keaton, because in Sherlock Jr., he does this thing that he has this pattern of behavior to which he comes back to as a theme, which is which comments on his character in terms of the personality of his character, which the general doesn't have so much. You can kind of identify certain traits of the character, but normally, I think in silent films you don't really have an assessment of the complexity of the character to a big depth. Normally silent films, I don't think that they have the time to assess that. It's much more to do with the circumstance and the solving of the problem. So here, I think it's very endearing that you have a character in Sherlock Jr., which you can kind of follow and be gripped by different aspects of his personality. Like he's clumsy, but he is full of heart. He's courageous in a way. He is very generous because you have the whole situation with the $1 bill at the beginning of the film, which kind of works with I mean, what I was meaning to say is that the pattern in the film that you kind of see once and again is that because how clumsy he is, he's sometimes looking at his book, like How to Be a Great Detective book, which is kind of it's a note of the dry humor that I think is distinctive of Buster Keaton. There is a clear use of irony and a clear use of dry humor in
It's very British,
Buster
also.
Keaton. It's very British, also. Exactly. I don't think maybe you feel this so much with Chaplin. Like you said, Leo, Chaplin is much more about the emotion and the overall emotional journey. Here, you see a lot of the dry humor. We have the note with this book, which is How to Be a Great Detective, which is almost like crime fighting for fools. That kind of for dorks. Those contemporary books that we
Idiots.
have
Yeah.
for idiots. And then inside the book, you have these kind of very simpleton rules like one, search everyone. Two, shadow your main guy. It's like it's very akin to a Wes Anderson, kind of those kind of frames of books that Wes Anderson has that then through the shadows single out the very lines within the book. So it has a quirkiness from a Wes Anderson book, or when those books pop up in his films, or I should say rather, Wes Anderson steals from Buster Keaton, perhaps. But
Steals, yeah, absolutely.
steals, perhaps
Yeah,
inspired.
willingly.
But essentially, when he's looking at his book, or when he's looking at the dollar bill, there is this pattern of behavior, this motif throughout the film that Buster Keaton takes advantage of, which to express his clumsiness, while he's checking this thing that's going to give him the knowledge, to perform, somebody else is looking at what he's doing. Like for example, he's checking the book, he reads the rule, search everyone. Meanwhile, the villain is looking at the rule and taking advantage of that, and he puts the watch inside his pocket and then frames him. So that is a constant comment on his clumsiness. At the same time, you see the beginnings of a rule of classical narrative that is used by Hitchcock, which is the suspense kind of way of making of the plot, which is something that the protagonist doesn't know. When he gets framed, when the watch is put inside his pocket by the villain, and he starts searching everybody, and then the villain say, "Why don't search yourself?" And then he searches. The watch is there. You know that there's something that the protagonist doesn't know. More than once, you kind of have that piece of narrative device operating in there. One other thing that I like is kind of the moment with the $1 bill. It's very, it's a great use of that thing that comedians do in stand up, which is the three-stage joke. It's the way that the punchline is built. First, you have the setup, He looks for these dollar bills in the middle of the trash. A woman comes, that you find a $1 bill, and then he says, "Describe it." And and the woman starts describing the dollar bill. He's trying to check, okay, it looks like this. He has a dollar bill to his side. But then again, the woman is looking at how the dollar bill looks like while he's not looking at her. So, and the whole of this is communicated to you through one single shot, this fixed held shot that shows what he's doing looking at the dollar bill and what she's doing describing the dollar bill, but then taking advantage whenever he's not looking to look at the dollar bill that he has on his hands. So you see the whole of this through one shot, and it's very potent in terms of the comedy potential. And then you have the yes, yes.
There's a great moment, also like that sort of descriptive humor, where it's in the dream when the guy is describing what Buster Keaton is doing with the pool ball, and he's always doing these gestures like it went over,
Oh yeah,
it
yeah,
went
yeah,
under
yeah.
the side, and
Definitely.
it's really well done because it's also sort of a description of what is happening, and it's so expressive. I mean, I really liked it. Yeah.
And then you have the second part where then comes the younger woman, and by then beyond the setup you need to build upon the joke, build upon expectations, try to invest the viewer on it, and by then he already knows what the woman wants. He doesn't even ask. You're looking for a $1 bill. This side looks like this. Okay, here you go. He just gives it out. And then third time, then you have the punchline. No innocent bystander coming in to ask for the $1 bill. It's a big blue collar worker with a monobrow, and you just have a close up on him, this big buff guy, and when you come back to Keaton, there's no way there is a fucking question of, do you want a $1 bill? No, he just gives them out. But then you need to play on expectations and deliver in a clever way something different. And then the buff guy says, "No, I don't want that $1 bill." He looks in the trash and he finds the wallet full of $1 bills. So it's very ingenious how he creates these little endearing moments.
Constantly building on the expectation of the dollar bill, and at the same time, it communicates the problem of the character, which is he has no money and he wants to buy the girl that box, and that then builds to the problem of him changing the value of the box to $4, and that incriminates him further. So he's like constantly making that mistake. It's interesting how in the film he's this really good guy. Like in the dream film, he's the successful detective, and he seems like a rich man. You see his hand go into the doorbell. He's like with the glove, the very fancy glove, and the way he behaves. So I think the film also communicates like what are the ambitions and the unconsciousness or the conscious things that the
Definitely, yeah.
character wants. He wants to be in the reality. He gets fooled by the guy, but in the film he fools the guy. They can't fool him. He knows exactly what's up, and he's constantly avoiding their schemes.
And that is one of the attributes of that sequence. I was speaking badly of it just moments ago, but it's like you said, it has both things. It's at the same time supposed to entertain the people, and you have these characters that are a little disconnected with, let's say, the causality of the narrative. But at the same time, the most interesting about it is that it does speak to his insecurities and his ambitions as a detective. He just, he does dream himself as this big fancy detective. Even with an assistant, he transforms his own boss in his own assistant.
Yeah.
One of the best characters of all is that the assistant is always prepared with something. He shows up on a bike, he's disguised as a cop, and he's always ready with some device for him
Yeah.
to help
the
him.
moment he jumps through the window, it becomes an old lady passing
Yes,
by.
that was one of the most unexpected things I've ever seen on film. Like, I was not expecting. I laughed my ass off when I saw that.
Or
Very
jumping
funny.
through the suitcase. That one is a classic as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I thought, how the fuck? I mean, my jaw dropped when I saw
Yeah.
that. I mean, how the heck did he do
Insane.
that?
That's a magic trick, really.
That's a magic trick.
The guy
But also,
is like standing horizontally, and when he jumps through, the guy who's standing horizontally falls down. So it's hard to explain. Like, but yeah, it's a magic trick, and the whole film is filled with magic tricks, really.
true.
Yeah, I think it's a shame the sort of moment of the beginning of the slapstick begins only at around the 20-minute mark. I think, you mentioned that in the beginning, that perhaps formally it could have been more steady throughout, and it's something that starts only after a bit. which I mean, I didn't have a problem with. I just it clearly came at a moment instead of being something perhaps more fluid.
I mean, that's like a common complaint I see people, and even myself, I've had before of of a Keaton film, where the first half is not as impressive as the second half. But I think it's on purpose, because if the whole film is the same sustained, like constant feats of physical, like some physical feat, then it doesn't make, it's not as impressive if it's the whole film is on that register. So what he usually does is the first half is more contained, and then progressively things escalate to chaos.
Yeah, I
And
appreciate
it
that more.
Yeah, and even narratively it makes sense because
exactly,
things get increasingly
it's a climax.
demanding and more dramatic, and yeah, the stakes are higher.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's so impressive that then people are like, I wish it was the whole thing. It's like, I want more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a testament to how good the film becomes.
Exactly.
But I do like the fact, for me, something that distinguishes him from Chaplin actually is that I like the fact that the first half is much more about almost a comment on him as a filmmaker and his interests. What is the traits and the personality of his tone and humor, where you kind of start understanding the details of his dry humor and his irony. Because, like you said, we have picked up on a couple of things already. The way that he changes the price of the box of what is it, sweets or jewelry?
I'm
What
not
is it?
even sure. I think it's a box for jewelry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
jewelry.
the box of jewelry that he buys, he changes the price of the box from 100 to the 400. I laughed when that moment came, like, you sly dog, like, it's fucking stupid. So that, impresses me, and that is part of the personality as much as a slapstick. Sometimes when the slapstick happens, that's when I'm less engaged with. But at the same time, I cannot say that it doesn't impress me, that it's not endearing. I find it super impressive when he kind of grabs that, I don't know what you call it, um, that bar thing that allows cars to pass in passageways. I don't know.
The toll,
The
like
toll.
The toll, if that's what you call it. He picks it up from from the high end and he falls down on the car. That's very impressive. Another thing that is very impressive also on the slapstick arena of things, on a visual style, and I've never seen this on a silent film, is you have this tracking shot of him. I think he's running away from a couple of thugs from the house he was in. He discovers the villain and he runs away from them as they're trying to capture him. And you have this tracking shot of him running down the street, and you have this whole depth of field of the street and the cars passing and the people on the street, and he's running away. And then he's picked up by his assistant on a motorbike, and then you follow him on the motorbike, still in various degrees of tracking shots. But it's just the idea on a silent film that you have a tracking shot in a chase sequence, whether it's on foot or on top of the bike, that is impressive to me. And then, of course, there is a continuation of this with the train in the General, his other film. This to say that I've never seen, tracking shot sequences in chasing sequences in silent films. That's very
I
impressive.
mean, that one you're talking about,
Um,
the motorcycle, yeah. There's that scene where the camera is like on his side when he's on the motorcycle,
yeah, yeah,
and he's
yeah.
going through the train that is approaching him. Like that shot, the lateral shot, yeah, it's very impressive. Every time it cuts to that,
I don't know if that's a projection or not.
I don't think so. I think he probably did
Yeah.
it. I mean, I wouldn't imagine Keaton would say, well, let's just use a real
Yeah.
projection.
but
Yeah.
it kind of has the feel of a projection,
Yeah.
I think.
That one has. Out of them all, that one is the one that I felt that it was Emil. But, who knows?
It's possible. I mean, I
But I
wouldn't.
mean, yeah, he's such an athlete. I mean, the way he's running and you can see how fast he's going because it's against the bike. I mean, it's impressive. Everything he does, it's athletically, it's so challenging.
Mhm. And the thing is, the fact, the performative physical gags that are done in this silent era, I don't think they could be done today as a whole film. Now that I think, would I like to see that again? I think it's not just in the sense of the technological advancement that has taken place, and so we allow ourselves to do other things, but also it's what makes these films precious and different. Every time you come back to them, even the ones you haven't seen yet, you feel you're watching a film anew, and what makes them different is the idiosyncrasies of what they were able to do at the time and what they were experimenting with at the time. Even when you watch one of his first films, I think even his first, which is 1 Week, which is a shorter film that he has, the way he deconstructs that house as he's building it, the way the ceiling breaks down, mangled and kind of plastic. I mean, it's just so. It would sound so fake today, but it's so innovative and impressive for a film that is of then. You know, when you see it again, it belongs to that time. Today is impressive because the frame of reference is of that time. So it's interesting to put things in that context. Those feats today would be redundant or unimpressive, but within the frame of those films of that time, they are impressive. They've become something else when they are retrieved back from the 1920s and seen anew today. I don't know if you see it the same way, but I think it's a curious thought I find about those films.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree.
Mm.
I mean, no, at least in a sense that I don't find them impressive in themselves. Just looking at the films that were being done at the time. I mean, I think it's really impressive, just generally,
No,
because
it's really impressive generally, but granted, it depends on the stunt that we're talking about. Particularly think on the house with the ceiling falling like it's some kind of cloth. If I saw that today, I would be like, you know. But back then, the ceiling cloth type thing that works in that moment. I'm talking about 1 week in specific
Yeah,
right
I don't
now.
know what you mean by like a cloth though.
Do you remember that in 1 week there's this kind of ceiling breaking down,
Ah,
and
you
it's not
mean
a real ceiling. It's like
yeah.
a cloth
I mean,
material.
but that's like it's the floor. Yeah, it's not the ceiling. It's the floor. You mean with with the
For
piano,
him
right?
is for him is the ceiling. For the other man in the upper floor is the floor.
Okay,
I don't know
no,
if
we have
you're.
different definitions of ceiling here, right? You know, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I get what you're. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right.
There's this man who is trying to foil his marriage, who is in the upper floor. He's sitting in there. And he starts sinking
Yeah, yeah.
on the upper
I
floor.
know what you mean.
Yeah.
But I think that's funny because it's so over the top, like plastic. It's like,
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, if you see it only through that, it's funny because it's so plastic, and it's impressive because it's so plastic. But I'm just saying, from the perspective of if this kind of thing was done today,
yeah, I get what you mean.
I don't know, you know, but because it's then, it has great value. I know. I'm not saying that. Oh, it's then. Poor things. You know, they couldn't do any better. Oh, they were doing things
Don't
for
be
fun. I'm not trying to
patronizing.
be patronizing. I'm not at all. You know, I'm just saying that these films are magical because they do these things. That today isn't done. You know, today it just isn't done because we have other effects. We have other
That
technology.
applies to
So nobody
everything.
wastes time doing that. You know.
That like there are 70s films that are great because they exist in that context of the
Yeah,
70s
yeah, yeah.
film. I mean, that's the way it is. Like a lot of these films you couldn't do today because there are regulations against what the fuck Keaton was doing. He couldn't
Yeah,
risk his
that
life
too.
like
You
this.
know, that too. But the fact that what I'm trying to aim at is that today we have the technology and the effects to do more. Nobody's thinking about doing these type ceilings again. But I like these type ceilings. Let's say I'm talking about the type ceiling question to say many other things really, but this is really a question of technology difference and where we are at now and where they were at then. And I'm just saying, in this distinction, I think is what makes this film special.
Of course, yeah. I mean, they are special because they were made early in the history of cinema and they were still finding new ways to
Yeah, so to use
communicate.
a type of resources and a type of technology to put an end to the question that it's not used today because nobody is interested, but that's what makes it interesting.
I think the bigger thing is they always were using the latest things and doing
See,
the
yes,
latest
at the
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
things
of
and
yeah,
course.
trying
yeah,
their absolute best the same way
yeah.
they do now, just with different technology. And that's the part you can appreciate. It's the seeing the effort and
Exactly. Yes, 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 yes. So then again, I mean, this could be taken in a patronizing way, but I'm not trying to be patronizing because I do agree with you, Miguel. It is the latest thing of the time, at the time, and it is
good.
impressive for the time. So, yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
Let me just add a little
Mhm.
moment of cinematography. I don't know if you remember those bits where it's it's almost like how can he do a small zoom or small focus?
The cuts,
Yeah, and
the
he cuts
image.
with the
Yeah,
camera lens and sort of I don't know how exactly what he did it, how he did it, but it's so interesting to see that he just squares the image and becomes
I'm trying to
completely
place what you're
focused.
talking about.
like when you see the book and it says how to be a detective, and the
He
image sort
uses the
of cuts.
shadows.
Yeah,
It's not a shadow, but
Shadows, you know, but I don't know what that is exactly,
it's like
but
he literally caps the lens with something and you just focus on that part.
exactly. I think it's that. Probably uses like cardboard or something like that, or maybe the lens cap itself does it. I don't know.
But it's like how do you do an insert that's even more focused without a
yeah, yeah,
zoom
yeah.
and you just cap the lens. Very very
Yeah.
interesting.
It's like when these silent films do the iris and just do the face of the character
Yeah.
instead of doing the zoom in or doing like a close up. Because at the time they still, some films they like were still figuring out how to get the camera really close to the character. Sometimes they just didn't think about it sometimes, so they did the iris.
And it's interesting that this film actually has more in common with Mulholland Drive than I thought because of the dream sequence and the
Yeah.
whole surrealist part. And it's interesting how we
Yeah.
connected once again
Another one by
unexpectedly.
mistake.
But coming back to, you know, a little detail, which is, you know, this is the beginning of the action films for me with comedy, and I find it interesting that the action hero started through comedy, more of a sense of, you know, not there wasn't an eagerness to watch. What is so impressive is there wasn't an eagerness to watch a brave protagonist being a badass, you know, and overcoming a villain or obstacles in an impressive way, but instead to watch the common man overcoming these obstacles. And the point was the ridiculousness of it, and you know, how silly he would look, or how he would react to it, better or worse. So yeah, it is interesting that, but therein lies, you know, the beginnings of the action hero that would come later with the westerns and the film noir, and eventually with James Bond in the 60s that would pave the way to franchises.
Of course, you
So yeah, I
mentioned
find it very
Bond.
interesting. I need to mention Bond, you know, so you
The
know,
Royale without cheese bingo. Tomás mentions
bingo.
Bond.
That's the Easter egg.
Yeah, but on that note, there's also Buster Keaton and Errol Lloyd are probably um, the two precursors to the action hero. Errol Lloyd again, he's like usually plays a loser, a nerd, something like that. But in Safety Last, uh, there's that scene, the final scene, very popular, of him hanging
In the building,
in the
on the
building
clock.
with the clock, which is like very tense. It's almost beyond comedy. It's like, is he gonna fall and die? It's a different type of. It's a tension that is much more akin to action
Yeah,
than to
definitely.
comedy.
And to that degree, the general is much more akin to an action film, you know,
Exactly.
and the how he bears the protagonist role, I think, is much more or less as a tramp. Although he has traits of a tramp, I think he, because of the knowledge he has of that train and the capacity and the flexibility that he has to adapt to situations and to make ends meet with the obstacles that he faces, and to foil the villains, let's say, of the story, and to be always a step further than them, even when he is at the most difficult of situations inside that train. It is very interesting, and it's very akin to a like a superhero or an action hero.
I mean, I think
Um,
that scene in Safety Last is so impressive. I mean, probably one of the more laudable aspects of these films is that you have a comedy film that really builds up the tension, and I think that's at least one in part one thing that films today don't do, at least comedies. You don't get see that real tension that you would see in an action film,
not a lot of
being
comedies today
portrayed
do
in a comedy.
slapstick, I guess.
But regardless of the type of
Uh,
comedy, that it gets to that point of tension where you really feel for the character and whether or not he survives.
yeah,
In a comedy, that just isn't. I don't know. It's just something that got lost in
It's
time,
not thought
and you just
about.
don't.
that's
Yeah,
an
exactly.
interesting thing. You know, there isn't a question of survival in comedy today. I mean, what would that be? The question of surviving. It is interesting because back then it was the question of will the character survive? Will the character outlast this moment? You know, for Keaton would be a house wall coming down on him, and voila, he came out the other end from a window. A guy that is everlasting through time.
I
Today,
think
that
it's
doesn't
also
happen.
yeah, but I think it's also because of that thing we are talking about the advancement of technology. I mean, because we were talking about such physical manual things of these stunts and how they were actually being made. I mean, it kind of connected the audience with the scenes as well and that side, and they were kind of driven to the backstage and to the behind the scenes, and they clearly knew what the actor was doing beyond just the narrative itself. So they were much more connected with the how it's made. And yeah, in today's films, that just doesn't happen. You get to see all this technology and CGI. You just know the actors are protected. They have stunts, all these things, cables, and you just get a little, a little away from that side of it, and you just focus on the action, which is good because there's a real connection with the story. But at the same time, you kind of lose that tension that these comedies build. And maybe the closest thing is these ridiculous stunts that Tom Cruise does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But even
absolutely.
then,
And it's
it's
that
not
thing.
the same.
It is part of that thing that we were talking about, which is it is what makes these silent films precious. It's when you're watching Buster Keaton, you know that he's doing those things for real, and there's a tangibility to watching that man
Yeah.
perform and kicking logs in a in a train track, or riding a bike without someone conducting the motorbike. It's just one can just be speechless and in awe at what he does. There's no way I can even comment. You can just witness and watch what he does.
Well, ultimately, it's what Tom Cruise wants. I mean, he just
Yeah, yeah, it
those
is. It
physical
is.
things really go back to that time and make you feel that way.
You know, the camera as well acts in harmony with the actor as he makes the stunt today. When Tom Cruise makes a stunt, the camera itself is kind of making a stunt or accompanying him in this incredible voyage or incredible performance. When he jumps out of the plane in Mission Impossible Fallout, the camera is also going with him and is this continuous shot. So what you're seeing visually is also impressive. And somehow, in itself, of course, it is amazing, because you are granted this point of view of the action from all angles that you wouldn't have in the silent films. But at the same time, this grants a silent film like Sherlock Jr. or The General something very special. I think the stillness of the silent film would allow you to just not be distracted by the fantastical nature of the visual and just be focused on the fantastical nature of the physical performance.
Yeah, what's happening in the screen.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think
It's pros and
still,
cons,
yeah,
you
it's
get
pros and cons.
Yeah,
it's different ice creams. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I
chocolate or
think so.
vanilla.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they're both tasty.
I brought Tom Cruise up, and I realized that kind of seems like that scene in where he's climbing Burj Khalifa kind of mimics the Safety Last scene. It's
Hmm.
almost like an homage sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
possibly. Yeah, I mean, Tom Cruise understands that what makes those films so timeless, like Keaton and Lloyd, is the physical nature of it, and how impressive it is. Like these films, Safety Last is from 1923, Sherlock Jr. 1924, General 26. It's like 100, almost 100 years old, all of them, and they still have a lot of lasting power. They're still talked about in pop culture, some not to different extents, of course, but in cinephile circles especially, they're still mentioned all the time because we love to see these types of impressive stunts and things being actually done and being filmed uh, almost like a documentary in a documentary way, like
Hmm.
seeing these things being accomplished and be put in history, documented like this. And I think Tom Cruise is aiming for something similar. I think, yeah, in 100 years, we can watch the Mission Impossible films and we'll be
Yeah.
talking about he really did it. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's going to be stunts that hold up better than others, but it's still impressive. And that's the same with these films. Like, not every Keaton film has the most impressive stunt ever, but it's still charming to watch and very. It's lovely. It's lovely to see.
And in the general specific, I really loved the camera work. You have beautiful shots in that film, and a very surprising depth of field.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you really feel that the production value had a bump in that film. This one is from 1924, Sherlock Jr., and the general is 1927, perhaps. Not sure.
So 26, 27.
So yeah, so it's very impressive, the level of production design that he brought up, building these small towns and the railroad. And you have actually a fucking train chase. It's two trains running after each other. I have never seen that on film. Whether we're talking about 60s, 70s, 30s today, I haven't seen that happening. I have seen a train after another train in the 20s. That's when I saw it for the first time. I was legitimately brought back in time, and I saw that, witnessed that, and it was as every bit amazing as if I was watching back then. And I think that is the greatest compliment that you can give, to one of these films.
Yeah, there's these shots you were talking about depth of field. Like, a lot of the time, the shot is like lateral, and it's showing the train move like from screen right to screen left. But then sometimes it cuts inside the train, and you see a head in behind. It's like every time he cuts, it's like very surprising because you don't expect that much depth of field in a silent film, even though, towards 26, 27, 29, it was already used.
When he is in town and he's talking with people, and suddenly you have these close-ups of him, looking into camera as if the camera was another person. So being that the camera is the point of view of another person talking back to him, he sometimes looks into camera and he's talking with the other person, and it's just impressive the level of detail that is in the face. Maybe this is a question of how much renovation work was done to the film, but the detail being there already so some information can have been taken. The value is really in the film itself that captured these amazing shots, and it's a very beautiful film in my mind. Very impressive.
I mean, another thing we were talking about silent films and watching the perspective, like, oh, this is from this time. I think that they benefit from as well is that you're not used to seeing shot reverse shot, for example, in a silent film. It's usually much more
true
bidimensional. So when they do it is impressive, and you're like, oh, I didn't expect that to cut there. And
it actually happens in a shot reverse shot moment. It happens in a Sherlock Jr. very briefly, in a moment that I don't like so much. I don't see the need for it, which is when we are right ahead introduced to our protagonist. He is seated in the movie theater reading his book, How to Be a Great Detective. Suddenly his boss, tells him, "Hey, detective, clean the floor." I hear these voices in my head when I'm watching the film. And suddenly we cut back to his love interest. You have this little title card saying "the girl with the case" or "the girl in the case." And there's the girl feeding the dog, and then you cut back to his father. And there's a little moment of the father talking with the man he hired to help him out in his property. And this little short reverse shot moment doesn't work because it's not within the axis. It's not like right to left, left to right, that kind of thing. They cut and they seem to be looking at the same end of the frame, so it doesn't work. So you see there very briefly an attempt at a short reverse shot situation, but what you see is like two people who seem disconnected. They're not talking to, but because we're so advanced in our language of cinema as an audience, we kind of forgive it, and because it's so brief, we kind of accept it as, oh, it's two men talking to each other, and so you don't really notice it. But
for me, that initial scene is almost like a credit scene, so that I didn't even think of it as a shot reverse shot. It was more like showing the characters.
To me, it's the kind of thing that you don't need it. I can see the characters later on, and okay.
I get,
so
but
I don't
movies
see
have movies have credit scenes, don't
no,
they?
but you don't have credit scenes where.
No, it's a creative one.
This is the type of credit scenes that we watch in 80s films, where by the end of the film we will watch the freeze frame of the characters and Nana has ta-da-ta, like
exactly.
it doesn't.
It's endearing.
Best time in movie history.
Okay.
It's endearing. Like it showed, yeah, the girl in the case, and then it says the actor's name, and then it shows
Yeah,
her,
it's true. It is
and
true.
then it says,
It's just it's a bump in the road, man. It's a bump in the road.
no, I get that. That's fair, but I'm just saying the shot reverse shot is not really.
I think
don't.
much better is the last scene as a shot reverse shot with his face and the screen. I think we can consider it a shot reverse shot, even though it's.
Yeah, good point. Good
I
point.
mean, yeah,
Actually, very funny moment.
yeah, it's great. It's great. And I mean, really, you had some complaints about the emotional core. I think so. I think you said it before I disconnected. But
Eh,
some extent.
some extent, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, that scene really makes you fall in love with his
Oh
character.
yeah,
I mean,
true,
his
true, true.
nuances are so great. And the very last moment where he sees the babies and kind of goes like,
Oh.
"Oh, okay, this is the next step."
Yeah. And it's within that motif that I was talking about that while one character is doing something, the other is taking advantage by looking at something the other character is not taking notice of. You know, he uses this a lot. So while she is, you know, to my confusion, looking away, like giving him the leeway to look at the film and see, okay, this is the next step. This is how I conquer her. Because he's always like, oh, okay, I'll look the other way. It's just like, what are you doing, man? Like, it's kind of, you know, made up. You don't believe it. But because of the nature, the very nature of that.
There are many moments in the film where you just don't believe it because it's towards the end game of the scenes. I think it's what they're building towards, and that scene I think is great. That she does that. That she always
Yeah.
goes back and gives to that space. I mean,
I think
it's so sweet.
it's even funnier because it feels unreal and that she allows him to have that space to look at the film.
Yeah. I think it's better
Yeah.
because she does it.
Mm-hmm. Once again, you know, if that was made today, a similar frame of a similar situation, you wouldn't believe in perhaps. But done with by Buster in that time
Depends
frame.
on the director and
Yeah,
the
depends
genre
on the context, the genre.
you know, yeah, what the intentions of the film. I mean, what
If you
sort
saw
of
the same
humor? What about
shot.
Wes Anderson films?
Yeah,
I mean, they
exactly,
have
exactly.
such up
Okay,
there comedy.
fair enough.
You have to. I think we are more unfair to modern
Maybe, yeah.
films a lot of times because they're current, they're immediate, and it's a different context. Where that's why a lot of times you watch a film in the current era, and then years later
Depends
you
on the audience.
rewatch
There's
it.
a lot of, you know, there's a, you know, we talk about old films and we like old films, but you know sometimes I'm surprised by, you know, certain, you know, past friends that I sometimes find, and when I when I introduce into the podcast or whatever, I once showed a friend of mine I didn't saw in, you know, a long while, the films that we reviewed on the podcast. He saw it and he was surprised that we watch old films. Like you watch films from 1958,
Oh.
and it to me is like, oh yeah, you're that type of person. I completely forgot that. Oh, okay, this is not the context.
Wait a minute,
not
you watch films from the 20th century?
Oh
yeah,
my
you know,
God.
so you're then reminded that there are people that don't care about old films, and to them, you know, modern films are the only cinema that exists. And that type of situation is funny to me because I have this little inner dialogue with myself, like, oh shit, he's not a cinephile, like, so he's not going to pick up on this. He's not going to be interested, perhaps, but it is interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of people for different things. I think some would be more forgiving, some wouldn't, of modern films.
But I mean, what do you expect in a cinema podcast? I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just
I mean, there's no. Then again, you know, there are cinema podcasts that I would imagine are only interested in modern films.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I think if you're not watching Buster Keaton films or Chaplin films, you're missing out.
So,
That's
should we go
pretty much
for
it.
final monologue?
I mean, wait.
I'll
Let
do
me
this.
just finish with a Orson Welles quote about Keaton.
Okay.
A very great artist and one of the most beautiful men I ever saw on the screen.
Yeah, I caught up on that as well.
Yeah, very nice.
And I was, you know, I watched The General, and 1 week after I watched this film of his, Sherlock Jr. And I did saw that Orson Welles quote, and so when I watched these other films of his, I was very attentive to his looks, and I was like, yeah, that's a beautiful man.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful man, undeniably. who then, he then, after the 20s, he was hired by MGM. And so that's when his career went through a
To the
downslope.
toilet.
And he lost his independent, flair and creativity to do the things that he wanted to do. And so
Alcoholism
he
as
ended
well.
up in alcoholism. But he had other appearances. He ended up appearing in The Twilight Zone back in the 60s, I think, or the 50s.
Sunset
In one
Boulevard
of
as
those
well.
episodes. Sunset Boulevard. Oh my God. And I didn't notice him. So I didn't realize.
And
No,
he's
I didn't
not a
realize.
major character. He's
Okay.
one of the guys playing cards with
Ah.
Gloria Swanson.
I see. Yeah.
Because they're all washed up actors, so he's there.
I'm not accustomed to older Buster Keaton, so I must have lost him there. But yeah. He died of lung cancer, and he didn't even know it was lung cancer. He thought he had bronchitis. A little trivia. And he ended up in the hospital just playing cards with his friends.
Yeah, the broken neck for like years that he broke during
What?
Sherlock Jr.
Jesus.
in that water scene when he pulls it.
Oh fuck.
And then-
Broken neck.
I think the footage is the one that actually.
Yeah. He breaks his neck. He stands up. He like walks away. But then at the end of that day, he just had a lot of pain, a lot of headaches. They had to stop. But then only years later, like a doctor was looking at his neck. He saw a lump. He's like, "Man, you broke your neck."
You've had a broken neck for years.
My God. Oh my God. Jesus, how horrible.
And that is the end of the episode. If you'd like to reach out and suggest a film for the next one, you can find us on the podcast official Instagram and Facebook pages. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy.
Groovy.
Thanks for listening and see you next time.
Bye.
Adios.
Goodbye.